But the robbery attempt is now underway. You'll see Cole Younger and Phil Miller move into the arena. They'll be blocking the door so no one else can get into the bank. We're going to let you hear exactly what happened inside the bank on that fateful day.
Gentlemen. Yeah, we're going to rob this bank.
J.S. Allen, hardware
40 men outside here.
Suspicious.
No, I'm not. You're the cashier? No, I'm not the cashier. Hey, get down on your knees right now. You get down. You're the cashier. Open that safe.
Get your guns, boys. They're robbing our bank right now.
Open the safe. Come on, open the safe right now.
Get off the street! Everybody off the street or I'll kill you!
Safe or I'm gonna
Get off the street!
All right, come on. Hey, you guys, you get over there. You open the safe. Come on, right now.
Get off the street! Get off the street! Boys, come on! Get out of the bank! They know we're here! Come on, let's go! Get off the street! Everybody get off! Get back! Go back!
Is over. From its beginning to its close, it had lasted but 7 minutes. The funds in the bank were intact. 6 of the robbers were in flight, with at least 2 of them badly wounded. 2 ridered up horses prancing in the street. Lying on the street on the boardwalk were the bodies of 12 Miller, William Stiles. Mortally wounded was Nicholas Gustafson. In the bank was the body of Joe.
Made their living after the war at what they were best at and trained to do during the war, that is, robbing banks, trains, and mail coaches. While most veterans of the Civil War did settle back to normal civilian life, a small number were unable to. This video will explain why. Jesse James was born in Kearney, Missouri in 1858 and killed by 2 members of his own gang, Charles and Robert Ford, on April 2, 1882. Out of the turbulent Kansas-Missouri border strife of the 1850s, the seeds of the James Younger gang were planted and nurtured. Groups of heavily armed men, some attached to northern anti-slavery economic interests and others to southern pro-slavery elements, roamed the countryside unchecked. John Brown, a rabid northern abolitionist, became the symbol for the injustices of black servitude. Brown had 1 son killed in the Bleeding Kansas Territory and lost 2 more in his ill-fated raid on the arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in 1859. Brown's bloody Kansas career culminated in the ill-fated raid when he and 21 of his devoted followers attempted to steal rifles from a federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859. The young men who followed Brown were idealists who believed that black servitude must end and were ready to use violence. These men were ready to defend their beliefs to the death, and most of them did. 10 were killed with Brown at Harper's Ferry, and another 5 were later hanged shortly after Brown was executed. About 5 of them escaped. Only 5% of the southern population in Missouri at this time owned slaves, and most white Southerners were just poor yeoman farmers eking out a living. It mattered little to Brown and his type, however. They were consumed with a devotion to their cause and mesmerized by the flamboyant dialogue of the fiery, soul-scorching Brown. His body, along with many of his devotees, later hanged in Charlestown, Virginia, were buried together on his farm in Lake Placid, New York. The song John Brown's Body would be an inspiration to many Northern soldiers going into war. The trouble in Kansas was called a war to the knife and a knife to the hilt. Depredations on both sides were so numerous that it little mattered which side started it or even which side was more inhumane. In this border war, survival depended on who saw who first and got off the first shot. James Lane, a Kansas territorial official, became probably the most hated and feared man to Southern sympathizers, due to his zeal and excess in refusing to be intimidated by his enemies. After the war, Lane's atrocities were never investigated, as were Quantrell's or Bloody Bill Anderson's. In Bleeding Kansas, these territorial lawmen were the feudal equivalent of a warlord, and to remain neutral in such intense hate was to risk one's own life and property. Many an ambitious and prosperous farmstead was left in ruins by either party. The pro-Northern party became nicknamed the Jayhawkers and the Redlegs, and prided themselves in being able to dish out tragedy to match any received by their Southern counterparts. Negotiations were conducted with revolvers and bowie knives. Young Missouri farm boys, such as the James Youngers, whose only concern should have been the rigors of farming, now saw another side of life. They were too young to see death in all its cruelty, neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. Regiments from many Missouri towns fought against each other according to their political alignments. Bitter feelings that even after the war was over would never just go away. As one veteran of the Missouri border war said, a man had to just set his grief aside and take up his burden when the war ended, or it would just eat him up. Another Confederate veteran, when asked why some Confederate and Northern soldiers took to outlawry after the war, replied, "Some men just have more pain inside, and they feel and take things harder." If one could speak to the members of the James gang, he or she would find out that they were always just one robbery away from quitting for good. A bad analogy would be much like an alcoholic is always having his last beer, or a chain smoker is quitting after this last pack. William Clark Quantrell became the leader of a band of independent Confederate cavalry. Quantrell's men initially were more of a militia-type home guard and certainly had no intention of creating the notorious reputation they later received. Quantrell, an ambitious, frustrated son of a family of Ohio school teachers, moved to Kansas in search of economic opportunity and became attached to a pro-Southern Kansas faction. "A man had to be on one side or the other," said one of Quantrell's men. "If he weren't a man, and he might as well wear a skirt." Jesse James joined his brother Frank as a member of Quantrell's raiders in 1863, shortly after depredations were committed on the James family by pro-Northern sympathizers. Jesse put down the plow and took up the revolver, and would never put it down until the day he died. One historian, in commenting on the post-Civil War outlaw career of so many of Quantrell's raiders, said, "They craved excitement and despised sustained labor. They were unable or unwilling to adjust to the prosaic tasks of peacetime." Many of Quantrell's raiders also were beyond the protection of U.S. law due to the number of atrocities committed in the Kansas territories. The James and other members of Quantrell's raiders were not eligible for pardons issued to other Confederate soldiers. They were seen as war criminals, much like the Nazis after World War II. Little investigation was ever made after the war into the atrocities committed by the pro-Northern Jayhawkers and Redlegs, however. Quantrell's most infamous day occurred on August 21st, 1863, when he burned down the small cow town of Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas was viewed by Southern sympathizers as the headquarters for Northern Jayhawkers and Redlegs, serving under the despised James Lane. Quantrell's men came into town that day with revolvers blazing and swords drawn, killing every man in their way. Women and children were not harmed, however. A total of 142 Kansas men lost their lives that day, and Quantrell's name would be forever blackened in the records of American history. Frank James, the Youngers, and other members of the future James Gang were with Quantrell that day. The Lawrence raid was represented in the Northern press and trumped before the public as an example of Confederate cruelty and lawlessness. Nothing was ever mentioned of the fact that some 200 Confederate civilians were killed in the months preceding the Lawrence raid. After the war, Quantrell became a hunted man, traveling in disguise. He was traveling east after the war, hoping to get a pardon, which he never received. He continued robbing until he was finally ambushed by Union cavalry. Local legend has it that Quantrell met his end here, and two locals discussed their familiarity with the events.
This place right here, right down there, the house right where the house used to be right there.
Yeah.
It used to be the old cream station. And you remember Jesse James and them used to run through here?
Yeah.
There's a church about 4 miles on up the road here. Is where Jesse James and the person used to stay in a church up there, in the top of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And right over here, right across through here is where they got this old, got an old house over there, is where they used to have all the slaves and stuff at, the chains and stuff in them.
Mm-hmm.
And right down the road here is another place. It's where they used to have chains and stuff in them.
And where was Quantrell killed again? He was killed.
He was shot.
He was shot over.
He was shot right back over here on the other side of his house.
He was shot over here on the other side of the road over here.
Right yonder on the other side is that barn.
Now, right back here, it's a house back here. In it now from that battle.
Can you still see him?
Yeah, you can still see him. You can still see him. The man back there, I imagine he let you in there to see it.
Huh. Well, how would I get back there?
Go up here to the curve.
Oaks Lane.
Yeah.
That's where they buried all the gold around a silage over there, and a silage, big silage thing. Silo and a barn. And that's where they buried all the gold and stuff at. Right over there.
Mm-hmm.
But all the they had wars, I guess wars and stuff through here, where all people got shot all through here in Wakefield.
Well, why were there so many battles through here? I was just curious. Was it a road, some kind of important road, or
It used to be the railroad track.
Yeah, railroad.
This used to be the railroad track.
I
Right
stayed
okay.
where the railroad tracks at.
Okay.
That's where the railroad track used to be at. That's where Jesse James got in.
Railroad track ran all the way through here, all the way to Terracille, and there's the old deep hole right yonder.
Okay.
Right over there, white building was the deep hole.
That was the depot, huh?
Not this building, but that over
Over
yonder.
across the main road over there.
Track went clear through.
So were Quantrell and them? Were they on? They came in on a train. They weren't. They probably had their horses in the train, right?
Yeah, they jumped off the train right in here somewhere.
Right on this railroad cut. And he was killed where? Right? He died where? Right over here in this.
No, he was shot right here in this field. Right here in this field.
Right there.
Over there.
Would you know about exactly where, or?
No, I wouldn't know where.
I wasn't around
They said there's 50 some odd people was killed from there back there in this house.
Okay.
50 something people. And sure, he wasn't killed here. He was shot here, but he died in St. Joseph's Hospital.
Okay.
Louisville.
Okay.
I'll tell you somebody that you can get some stuff from on this here if you want to go see him.
Okay.
It's Tom Watson.
Okay.
He runs the newspaper office in Taylorsville.
Does he have pictures and things like
Yeah,
that?
he
Or?
got pictures and everything.
Uh-huh.
You go to the bank in Taylorsville,
Okay.
and right there by the bank, you see a door. Side of the bank, go up the steps right there, and he's right there over top of the bank. Hey.
We're in that field, all in this area here.
Within
All
a
the
half a
battle.
mile area.
Uh-huh.
It's all the battle was all way in here.
Were the Jameses with him at that time, do you know? Or?
No, James just wasn't with him at that time.
Okay.
Just the creators and stuff.
Okay.
And
They just had left them.
and
Frank and Jesse James was hid out up there at this church. Up there at, what is the name of it?
Big Spring Assembly of God Church.
Do you know what they were in this area for? Would you happen to know?
They were running.
They were just running? Because I had heard some things that they were trying to go back and get a pardon, because they knew they couldn't get a pardon in Missouri, so they were trying to get a pardon. They were going to go back east and try to get one with Lee's army or something.
I don't know how they was going to work it, but they was just gangsters like these are now these days today.
I'll tell you what you do. You go away up this road here
Yeah.
and go up here and you'll see not these two churches up here.
Uh-huh.
But go on into Nelson County.
Yeah.
And it's the only church on this road, on the side over here, but there's a graveyard over here and a church right here. And when you get up there, look, there's a little white door about this tall
Uh-huh.
at the top of it. That's where Jesse James and this other guy, Frank, went in there and stayed.
This was during Quantrill time or another time?
That's when they was running.
Uh-huh.
And but that's where they stayed at all the time.
Okay.
Quantrell's skull ended up in his hometown of Dover, Ohio, and later an anthropologist at Kent State used their forensic skills to give us an idea of what Quantrell really looked like. Jesse James became associated with the command of William H. Bloody Bill Anderson, an independent offshoot cavalry command of Quantrell. Quantrell's and Anderson's men would later, in post-Civil War years, claim to be affiliated with the Confederate cavalry raider, General Joe Shelby, but his influence over Anderson and Quantrell was small. After the war, Shelby was often called upon as a character witness on behalf of former Quantrell men who had gotten in trouble with the law. Bloody Bill's men included Jesse and Frank James, and they viewed themselves as a police force, guarding their lives and property from northern marauders. Indeed, their territory of operation included the areas around Lexington, Missouri, and along the Missouri River just outside Kansas City. Anderson's command was literally armed to the teeth with carbines, revolvers, and shotguns, stolen or confiscated from Union prisoners of war. One source states that some of Anderson's men carried as many as a dozen revolvers for volume of firepower at close quarters. Bloody Bill's men often wore stolen Union jackets in order to appear as Union cavalry. This gave them an element of surprise over their enemies. Jesse James undoubtedly learned the art of robbery as a member of Anderson's command. In order to obtain money and supplies, Anderson regularly pillaged Union towns, mail coaches, steamboats along the Missouri, and trains. Murder often accompanied many of these activities. Anderson was a highly effective commander, having his men drilled regularly on cavalry tactics. Any horse he took into battle was trained to be able to perform under gunfire. This gave him a tremendous advantage over raw Union troops sent against him. Bloody Bill had, early in the war, lost two of his sisters due to an accident, and he blamed the Unionists for it. It seems a jail in which his sisters were being held for being Southern sympathizers accidentally collapsed. Anderson was angry and thirsting for revenge. He sent threatening letters to the Kansas City Star and began displaying human scalps on his saddle. Any Union man or a male non-combatant was dead if Anderson pulled a revolver on him. Like Quantrell, however, he never hurt women or children. Anderson's reputation was blackened by the number of war atrocities he committed during the war, particularly the massacre of 35 Union prisoners at Centralia, Missouri in 1864. Young Jesse James was with Anderson's command at this time and probably participated in the massacre. Anderson finally met his end near Orick, Missouri by a Union cavalry regiment, especially trained to put Anderson permanently out of commission. James's outlaw career began shortly after the war, upon the refusal of a formal pardon for those attached to Quantrell and Anderson's commands. It is almost certain that these men did not enter a life of crime, believing it would be a pattern for life. Most hoped that one or two big heists would give them enough money to buy a farm or a business and never commit another crime. Too often, however, as was the case with the James gang, one crime led into another. One historian mentioned that Missouri had no higher crime rate than any other state at this time. Missouri received more publicity, probably due to railroad interests and other northern interests. Indeed, if the crime rate of some of the northern cities was compared to Kansas City area, Missouri would look the better. During this period also, with the corruption of President Grant's administration and lack of prosecution for white-collar crime, the James Younger gang sometimes looked like choir boys. Ironically, the first peacetime robbery of a train was not committed by unreconstructed rebels, but by ex-Union soldiers who had served in the Indiana State Militia. The Reno brothers, under the influence of elder brother Frank, robbed a train in Seymour, Indiana in 1867. They were later apprehended and lynched by an angry mob at New Albany, Indiana on December 12, 1868. Their sister, Laura Reno, was left with the task of giving the bodies a decent burial. The Renos were pursued by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, as were the James later. As railroad lines began to expand in Missouri, the James gang and their lawless band were seen as a detriment that must be immediately removed. The James gang, according to contemporary accounts, usually stopped a train by removing some rails or setting an obstacle on the track, not by chasing the train and jumping on the engine from their horse, as many a movie has displayed. Many a time a conductor was scalded to death when his train literally went off its tracks. Another preferred method of robbing a Yankee train was to hit it when it stopped to take on supplies, passengers, or fuel at the switching stations. Mainly, the James gang wanted the mail and any payrolls, and rarely bothered with small money such as looting passengers. If a passenger seemed wealthy or was recognized as a banker, railroad magistrate, or northern dignitary, he was searched for papers, and money was taken, however. Northern railroad tycoons employed the government to put a price on the James gang. The reward money of $10,000 was put up by the railroads. The railroads also hired Pinkerton's detective agency to stop the James gang. Pinkerton was responsible for coordinating Union espionage during the Civil War. One of his activities included encouraging local vigilante activity to take care of the James gang themselves. This was done by informal necktie parties. Due to the Panic of 1872, a mini-depression, Pinkerton was not able to pursue the James gang with any consistency. In his memoirs, he states that he spent most of his time in Chicago, fighting off financial ruin. In one poorly organized attempt to either kill or capture Jesse and Frank at their mother's farm, Pinkerton agents killed Jesse's younger brother and almost killed Jesse's mom. Local people who helped the Pinkertons during this operation were later subjected to retaliation by members of the James gang. There were one or two gangland-type slayings. Pinkerton agents did, however, manage to put one member of the James gang out of commission permanently and badly wounded another. In 1872, John Younger was shot to death in a gunfight with two Pinkertons, and Jim Younger was badly wounded. The James gang at this time evolved around the nucleus of Jesse and Frank James, the younger brothers, and other fringe members who came and went according to circumstances. There were substantiated reports of killings of gang members who were suspected of either turning state's evidence or betrayal. Supposedly, Jesse would later personally kill Ed Miller, brother of James gang member Clell Miller, for suspected disloyalty. Direct violence was not a modus operandi of the James gang. According to James historians, the James gang liked a quiet, smooth operation and rarely, if ever, came into town with revolvers drawn. Usually, they hid their arsenal under long linen duster jackets and only used their guns if they were resisted against. They liked to pose as cattle buyers and went into a bank during lunch hour when there was less activity. One of the gang members then asked the clerk to exchange a large denomination bill for smaller ones. When the teller opened the safe to exchange it, the order for hands up went out. There were often long periods of time between robberies, according to how big the take was. The James gang, once again, always seemed to be one big job from retiring forever. Some of the pictures here are of actual banks the James gang robbed. Here are money sacks from a bank robbed by the James gang in Richmond, Missouri. During the period of the James gang robberies, most people were very suspicious about banks, and banks were seen as institutions for wealthy people. The average day laborer had little contact with these institutions, and the farmers and workers expressed little grief when it was discovered a bank had been knocked off by the James gang. Many local people and family members supported the James gang by offering them food and shelter. Others were simply frightened of them. Local vigilantes expressed a desire to string them up, as they had others of Quantrell's men who had fallen on the wrong side of the law. For about 16 years, however, the James gang were able to avoid capture through their resourcefulness and a good network of informants and family. One former member of the James gang said that if Jesse suspected you of disloyalty, he would kill you, certain. About 2 members of the James gang were known or believed to have been executed by Jesse. One of the most famous of the James Younger robberies occurred at Northfield, Minnesota on September 7th, 1876. Northfield was about 700 miles away from the normal operating range of the James gang. Several people in the town became suspicious when they saw strangers on horseback enter their town. The little farm-oriented community Northfield was tight-knit, but the James gang gave an inconspicuous appearance in their long linen dusters and their ability to mix with the locals. They seemed like friendly people. They claimed to be cattle buyers visiting Minnesota, scouting out for a good buy. The James gang decided to rob Northfield for a number of reasons. For one, the bank there was owned by northern merchants hostile to the South during the war. Also, the James gang needed to branch out into other areas because the Kansas City area was getting too hot for them. As the strangers approached the bank, a man became curious about them. He followed them up to the bank and immediately realized they were about to rob it. He sent out the general alarm, and a few citizens who had access to firearms poured it on. The Jameses were not ambushed. The action of the Northfield citizens was spontaneous. Timing was ever important to the James gang. The goal was to get the money and get out as fast as possible. Even with the discovery by local townspeople of the strangers' purpose, the James gang still could have escaped with time to spare. The wrench in the gearwork occurred when the bank teller, Joseph Haywood, refused to cooperate with the robbers inside the bank. The other robbers, 5 in number, remained outside the bank and acted as sentries. Part of the formula for a smooth robbery required that the teller be intimidated, and Haywood wasn't. His refusal to aid the robbers gave the citizens time to arm. Haywood was shot through the head by Frank James for defying the order to open the safe. Every one of the James gang was wounded in this shootout, and 5 days later, the Youngers were captured, and another gang member, Charlie Pitts, killed. Jesse and Frank were the only ones to escape.
We're going to direct your attention to the north end of the arena. You'll see 3 men who have just eaten lunch on the west side of the river. They have crossed the bridge, the only bridge across the river at that time. These men, as you see, are dressed in long linen dusters, looking quite distinguished, wearing rather expensive clothing, big beautiful horses, expensive trappings. You are looking at Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and Frank James. We're proceeding to the pitching rail of the First National Bank. They have been very cautious to see that everything was in order on their trip into the bank area. However, it's not at all unusual in that day to see 3 men on horseback, dressed as they were. They drew little attention. Soon it will draw a lot of attention. Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and Frank James. These men were said to be conversant gentlemen for the most part. They were friendly. Wherever they went, they visited good people. They look in the bank, but don't go in as yet. They're going to check out the scene. Back down to Bridge Square. Direct your attention to the bank where J.S. Allen has just completed a transaction at the bank. Matter of fact, the books of the bank reflect that his transaction was the last one to be made prior to the robbery attempt. Now, Allen wonders about these 3 men, who they are, where they came from. They're strangers. But still, no suspicion of any trouble. Perhaps is asking them where they're from, what they're doing, and they most likely are telling them cattle buyers. We direct your attention to the bank area once again. The 2 other horsemen, Cole Younger and Flair Miller, have come up Division Street from the south. Upon their approach, you'll note that Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and Frank James head for the bank. Now, this is suspicious. 3 men going into the bank is one thing, but 5 men all dressed alike on big horses, something must be wrong. The men enter the bank, but J.S. Allen is suspicious. He's going to go back and find out just what's going on. That doesn't look right. And now there's a man standing at the doorway. There is something wrong. Allen is going to find out just what is going on inside that bank. But he's not going to be allowed. Now he's suspicious.
Get your guns, boys! They're robbing the bank!
Get your gun, boys. They're robbing the bank. Henry Hoover knows too. He's running to the Dampier Hotel. Now inside the bank, Frank James and the 2 pals are roughing up the bankers that waited on them. They're insisting that they open the bank door. The bank employees say, no, we're not going to open the bank door. A shot's fired past Haywood's ear. Bunker makes an escape. But still, they will not open the door. Nicholas Gustafson doesn't know what's going on. He hears a lot of commotion. He doesn't know what's happening. He's being ordered off the street for being a suicide.
Get off the street!
Is over.
Strange as it may seem, the Northfield robbery is the only one that is 100% laid at the James gang door, and this only because the Youngers were captured. Due to a lack of organization and a positive identification method by law enforcement officials, the Jameses were never 100% identified as really doing any robberies at all. Later, when Jesse was killed by Robert Ford, Frank James would be tried for some of the robberies, but he was never convicted on any account. None of the Youngers ever said who the other two robbers were. Be true to your friend, is what they believed. Loyalty to one another, the James Youngers had learned riding with Quantrell. One former Confederate comrade stated the reasons for the James Younger phenomena. He said, "The reason is simple. They just didn't know any other way to make a living other than by horse and revolver work." Railroad magnates and Missouri officials, not empathetic with the James gang, began to push for a more vigorous prosecution against them. Thomas J. Crittenden, the governor of Missouri, began to use unorthodox measures to end the myth. Crittenden carried this revolver out of fear of a James gang retaliation on him for attempting to prosecute them. Crittenden gave encouragement to vigilante groups in the area to take care. A few members of the James gang had already met their end this way. Thomas Little, a member of the James gang for about 2 years, was apprehended and lynched shortly after the robbery at Richmond, Missouri, with 2 others. Still, there were no takers to capture the elusive James gang. Most of the government officials around the Kansas City area were ex-Confederate officers themselves. They were empathetic to Quantrell's and Anderson's ex-guerrillas. There were rumors later proven true that Dick Liddell, a member of the James gang, had turned state's evidence against them. His testimony in the trial of Frank James was damaging, giving times and places, dates of robberies in great detail. His evidence was not allowed, however, because Liddell was already a convicted felon. Finally, officials working with Crittenden were able to identify 2 James gang members who were willing to betray Jesse. They were Robert and Charles Ford of Richmond, Missouri, who worked for Jesse as horse jockeys officially, but they also participated in his robberies. They were not ex-Quantrell men. A reward and immunity from prosecution was enough to sway the Fords to cooperate. Jesse was renting a small farmhouse on a prominent hill overlooking the city of St. Joseph, Missouri. Here is where the original house was located. The location offered privacy and ease to escape routes. In the house itself was a trapdoor to be used if necessary, and a saddled horse was kept behind the house ready for use. Jesse, according to the deal made between officials and the Fords, was to be killed by either Charlie or Robert as the opportunity arose. Robert was sitting in a chair just to the left of the front door, and Jesse was standing on a chair at the right, dusting a picture. Ford pulled the gun and fired, while Charlie stood at ready in case Robert needed help. Members of Jesse's family were in the house, including his wife and 2 children, when the shot exploded through his skull. Some claimed Ford was standing on the other side of the room, however, between Jesse and a bed, not by the door. Jesse had this neckerchief on at the time he was killed. The Fords acted on the day they did and the way they did because they believed that Jesse had obtained information from people on a deal made between them and Crittenden. Also, it was reported that Bob Ford had killed Wood Height, a first cousin of James, in an argument about the division of spoils from a recent robbery. There are sources that indicate that Jesse might have indeed knowledge of Ford's betrayal, and that shortly the Fords might be taking a ride with Jesse. This was the code word used by the James when they would execute a gang member suspected of disloyalty. James was normally wary of such gang members as the Ford, but it is conjectured that he was exhausted from his life on the run and his sixth sense was not working. Certainly, he was living on borrowed time. Supposedly, James was shot in the back of the head as he dusted the picture. Ford insisted, however, that Jesse was actually shot above the left eye as he turned rapidly when he heard the cocking mechanism of Ford's Smith Wesson .44. Is the wound above Jesse's eye, then, an exit wound or an entry wound, as insisted on by Robert Ford? Ford never denied that he intended to assassinate James, the deal made between him and Governor Crittenden, and that he believed he and his brother were marked for death by Jesse. Ford also insisted that when Jesse decided to execute a gang member, he would shoot them from behind also. Here is the original morning message given to Mrs. James after the premature death of her son. Crowds rushed to the house after the announcement that Jesse James was killed. The newspapers also were surprised that it was indeed Jesse James that had been killed. James had staged a fake death for himself many times to make everyone believe he had passed on. This time, however, it was for real. At the time of the assassination, James was planning another one of his, quote, last robberies, unquote, before he retired for good. This was the holdup of the Platte City, Missouri bank, located about 20 miles from St. Joseph on the Missouri River. His funeral was attended by a fanfare of relatives, friends, and former Confederate guerrillas of Quantrell's raiders. The Ford brothers were tried for murder, but they were pardoned. Charlie supposedly committed suicide in Richmond, Missouri, but there was some speculation it was more than a suicide. Nothing ever was proved. Robert tried to cash in on his newfound notoriety and received free railroad passes and gave speaking engagements about his shooting of James. He charged a nickel a head. Eventually, Bob Ford made his way to Colorado, where he was shotgunned to death during an argument by Ed O'Kelly. O'Kelly was supposedly a friend of the James family, but nothing was ever proved that O'Kelly acted the role of an avenging angel. Ford's body was taken back to Richmond, Missouri, where it was buried beside his brother Charlie, 15 miles from where rested the remains of Jesse James. The James gang was a product of their time. There were no VA hospitals to treat returning veterans, wounded in body and soul. There was no empathy, especially in northern circles, for the plight of Confederate veterans. There was almost no empathy even for the victorious northern soldiers as well. The U.S. government, in many cases, wouldn't even furnish returning veterans of the North with artificial limbs for legs and arms lost during the war. The Grand Army of the Republic, a lobby made up of ex-Union soldiers, was set up to ensure that Union veterans received their rights and benefits. The Confederate soldier had no counterpart. At this time, the policy of the U.S. government was to punish the Confederates for participating in the war, deny former Confederates property rights, voting rights, and medical attention. It is not surprising, then, that some Confederate veterans took up the horse and revolver as a way of life. It is really surprising, however, that so few of them actually did. The question must at this point be asked, if a pardon had been granted to the James Youngers after the Civil War, would their career of outlawry occurred at all? Overtures to the government for a full pardon had been made by members of both the James and Younger families. They were refused. Shortly after Jesse James was killed, his brother Frank surrendered to the authorities. He told them, "I have literally lived in the saddle. I have never known a day of peace." It was one long, anxious, inexorable, eternal vigil. When I slept, it was literally in the midst of an arsenal. If I heard dogs bark more fiercely than usual, or the feet of horses in a greater volume of sound, I stood to arms. Have you any idea what a man must endure who lives such a life? No, you cannot. No one can, unless he lives it for himself. Upon hearing of the surrender of Frank James, Alan Pinkerton of Pinkerton's detective agency said, "There's a lot of noise about Frank James now, but I doubt they will ever get him behind bars. There's too much sympathy in that state for those cold-blooded killers." As Pinkerton predicted, eventually Frank James was pardoned. The trial of Frank James was a real circus with jurors made up of former Confederate soldiers who were empathetic to the James. Upon announcement of the pardon, one local Missouri newspaper stated, "The crimes of the James gang cannot be excused, but they can be forgotten now that they have been pardoned under the law. They can and should be covered with that Christian charity that hides a multitude of sins."
Would be both profitable and prompt. The Mankato attempt failed to materialize, but they did gather in Northfield. They posed as cattle buyers as they came by train to Minnesota's the bank. We invite you to read it after the First National Bank with the hitching rail was located exactly where you see it today as part of the Northfield Historical Museum. You are looking at the exact building and location as it was seen. On his way, he shouted a loud warning, "Get your guns, boys, they're robbing the bank." Attention to the north end of the arena area, where 3 men are riding up toward the bank. You'll identify these men as Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and Frank James. They are destined to become involved in one of the most notorious bank raids in the history of the country in 1876. They have surveyed the scene and all seems very well. Nobody seems alarmed. They will casually tie their horses to the hitching post. Charlie Pitts, a hanger-on with the gang. Bob Younger, one of the members of the Younger clan, and Frank James. Both the James brothers and the Younger brothers were said to be gentlemen most of the time. They would visit with people, very conversant, very easy to get along with, it was said. But they were notorious in terms of the robberies that they attempted and carried out. They're now strolling down to the corner to see that all is well on Bridge Square. Nothing seems amiss. Seems like things should go smoothly as they rob the First National Bank of Northfield. Presently, 2 other horsemen are going to be riding in from the south as all seems well. The men are entering the bank. Their backup men are out front. Everything is going as planned. Everything seems to be checked out. However, here is what is happening inside the bank.
How can I help you, gentlemen? Yeah, we're gonna rob this thing. And don't anybody holler, because I got 40 men outside here. You the cashier?
No, I'm not.
Well, you the cashier?
No, I'm not the cashier.
Hey, you get down on your knees right now. You get down. You're the cashier. Open that safe. Open it.
There's a time lock on it, and it cannot be open right now.
Time?
Yes, Alan.
Open it.
Go back into the
Come
bank.
on, open the safe right now.
There's a time lock on it. It
They
can't
won't
be
let
open.
him in.
You open that safe or I'm gonna blow your brains out. Murder! Come
Something's
on.
wrong. He knows
You
there's
guys,
something
get over there. You
wrong.
open the safe. Come on, right now.
Get your guns, boys. They're robbing the bank. There goes the medical student around to the Dampfield Hotel.
Get off the street, Lieutenant!
They're now being armed in the two hardware
Get off
stores
the
right
street!
around the corner.
Let's not get back!
And the robbers are chasing the citizens off the street. In comes the three supportmen from the north. Melee begins.
Get off the street! Yeah, street!
The battle was over. From its beginning to its close, it had lasted at 7 minutes. The funds of the bank were intact. 6 of the robbers were in flight, with at least 2 of them badly wounded. 2 riderless horses pranced in the street, and lying on the street of the boardwalk, additional aid was obtained from law enforcement officers from the state and various cities in the southwest. Just Bob Younger and Frank James. It was not an uncommon sight in 1876 to see horse riders with their long white linen dusters, usually meaning that they had been on the trail, usually meaning that they perhaps were cattle buyers. The trappings and the horses were expensive. That in itself called some attention, drew some concern by some citizens in the city of Northfield. They are casually looking over the scene as they tie up their horses in front of the First National Bank. 2 other horsemen are in waiting at the south end of the block. Those 2 horsemen are Cole Younger and Clell Miller. They're watching the 3 tie up their horses. They're watching the 3 stroll down Oxford Square to see if all is well. If all is well, the men will go back to the bank, and Cole Younger and Clell Miller will soon join in the fray. They could visit with almost everyone. Frank James was an educated man. Jesse was the hothead of the group. Everything seems to be all right. The 3 men are proceeding back to the bank and will soon go in. When they go in, we will hear exactly what happens inside the bank. J.F. Allen has just made a transaction at the bank. He comes out of the bank, sees the 3 men go in, and he immediately is suspicious. And he's even more suspicious when he sees Cole Younger and Clell Miller ride up to the bank after 3 strangers had gone in. He will soon be going back to the bank. And he will not be allowed entry. Inside the bank, the robbers approach 3 employees.
How can I help you, gentlemen? Yeah, we're gonna rob this thing. And don't anybody holler, because I got 40 men outside. Yeah. You the cashier?
No, I'm not.
Hey, you the cashier? No, I'm not the cashier. Hey, you get down on your knees right now. You get down. No. You're the cashier. Open that safe. Open it.
Time cannot be open right now.
Time? Open the safe. Come on, open the safe right now.
There's a time lock on it. It can't be opened.
You open that safe or I'm gonna blow your brains out. Murder! Come on. Yeah, you guys, you open the safe. Come on, right now.
Something is wrong. Now he knows the real reason. Get your guns, boys. They're robbing the bank. Robbery.
Get up! Straight up!
People are chased from the street.
Get up! Straight!
Door. Gunshots are heard. The bank is being robbed. Young people are being armed. The battle is from the beginning to its close. It had lasted 7 minutes. The funds in the bank were attacked. 6 of the robbers were enslaved, with at least 2 of them badly wounded. 2 riderless horses pranced in the street, lying on the street and the boardwalk with the bodies of Clell Miller and William Stiles. Mortally wounded was Nicholas Gustafson. In the bank was the body of Joseph Lee Haywood. A posse was soon formed to go after the robbers, who in the meantime had stolen a horse and saddle just outside of Northfield. The chase continued for several days. Additional aid was obtained from law enforcement officers from the state and various cities to the southwest. Jesse and Frank James were not caught after the Northfield raid, but the defeat pushed them into retirement, thus ending a long string of successful robberies by probably the 2 most feared outlaws of the time. First of Northfield, a good hand to the volunteer raiders, and we emphasize